Alright. If you were to walk 8.5 miles that way, you would come across the Lois M. DeBerry Prison, which houses 730 inmates. If you were to walk 8 miles that way, you would come across the Charles B. Bass Correctional Complex, which houses just over 1,000 inmates. If you were to walk 10 miles that way, you would find the Riverbend Maximum Security Prison, which houses 600 inmates. If you were to walk 11 miles that way again, you would find the Tennessee State Prison for Women, which houses 500 inmates. So that's 2,830 inmates in the surrounding area. And according to the U.S. Bureau of Prison Statistics, 1,870, or roughly 2/3, are going to be released into the Nashville metro area, commit a crime, and then be put right back into prison. We are dealing with an incarceration system that is simply ineffective and antiquated. There are over 300 million people within the United States, and 7.2 million of them are in prison. Tennessee is one of the top 10 states with the highest amount of its population behind bars, having 50,500 people currently in jail. What's worse is that currently half of those inmates are in there for nonviolent crimes. I suggest the Tennessee State Legislature pass a bill, which I've coined the Effective Incarceration Act, which will introduce a new two-pronged policy in regards to prison reform. Now, the second piece of the policy I'm going to get into momentarily, but the first piece is pretty simple. We need to stop building prisons. From the day that this bill is passed, we need to completely stop constructing new prisons and allocate all funds that would go towards building prisons, towards prisoner rehabilitation and prison maintenance. I believe this policy change will address two of the most pressing issues surrounding the current Tennessee State prison system, which is its burden on our wallets and its inability to keep former convicts out of jail. Now, you might be asking, how did we get to this point where our prison system is so terrible and unable to keep people who they release out of jail? Now, there's a term coined American prison economics, which supports the notion that the more people in prison for a longer period of time equals more safety on the streets. And, logically, this kind of makes sense. More criminals off the streets means less criminals to commit crime. Less criminals to commit crime means less crime, which means more safety for all of us and our families. Unfortunately, this type of logic does not directly apply to human behavior. Despite the increasing incarceration rate, the U.S. Commission on Crime indicates that violent crimes have remained stable countrywide for the past 30 years. Now, I want to take, for example, North and South Dakota as a case study to show how the prison system is ineffective. Now, these are pretty much twins in regards to actual size, population, and just general persona. Now, the one main difference is that South Dakota incarcerates twice as many people as North Dakota. Yet, both of their crime rates remain exactly the same. So to reiterate, South Dakota incarcerates twice as many people as North Dakota. Yes, their crime rates are almost exactly the same. Now, rehabbing these people is an ethical question. There's a common phrase, you give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. You teach a man to fish and he'll learn to feed himself for a lifetime. Unfortunately, this idea of providing the means for ex-cons to provide for themselves is not taken to heart in the Tennessee Rehabilitation Program. According to the Tennessee Department of Corrections, state rehabilitation budgets are only 8% of the total prison budget. So that's 58 out of $649 million that goes towards rehabbing ex-convicts' deviant behavior. Now, in regards to the burden it is on taxpayers, according to a prison reform initiative known as the Sentencing Project, it costs about $23,000 a year per inmate to house an inmate in Tennessee State Prison. Now, my plan does not immediately alleviate this burden, but rather the money allocated will be used more effectively to keep Tennessee safer as well as cut costs in the long run. Now, a testament to this wastefulness is a statistic that shows that it costs about $61 a day to maintain a prisoner in prison, yet currently the poverty line for a family of 3 in the United States is only $14. Now, a recent editorial in the Tennessean suggests that these $23,000 burdens don't have to necessarily be burdens. They can be taxpayers. They can help stimulate our economy in the form of blue-collar jobs. Now, I've just elaborated on how stopping prison construction would be beneficial to the state as a whole. But the second phase of my plan that I mentioned earlier will address how. How are we going to actually keep these criminals out of prison? Now, I realize the prison system does have, its tremendous advantages. It puts bad, dangerous people away, and is actually a stimulant for our economy in the form of jobs for correctional officers and anybody who works at a prison. Unfortunately, the legal system used to punish criminals perpetuates an increase in prisoners, more specifically prisoners who do not have violent histories. Now, the second part of my act is that Tennessee repeal any mandatory minimums for misdemeanor crimes that are nonviolent and a first offense. So just to reiterate, that is repealing any mandatory minimums for misdemeanor crimes that are a first offense and nonviolent. Now, these mandatory minimums were enacted by Congress in 1986 in an effort to stem the drug problem by targeting high-level drug traffickers. The idea was that by imposing a mandatory minimum on low-level drug traffickers, it would convince them to cooperate with police and reveal information about high-level kingpins. However, this problem, this has not been the proper solution to the problem, as the U.S. Sentencing Commission reports that only 11% of federal drug convictions are high-level drug dealers. Moreover, according to prisonpolicy.org, these types of convictions are responsible for 80% of the increase in federal prisons in the 90s. The bottom line, we are not ridding the streets of drugs. The antidrug.com states that the U.S. has the highest consumption of marijuana and cocaine use. So these mandatory minimums are completely ineffective. Now, we think that putting people in jail will make them realize their mistakes and want to become better, well-adjusted citizens. But the truth of the matter is we're taking people from violent neighborhoods, violent backgrounds, and putting them into a place that is driven by violence and crime and black markets, and expect them to, when they come out, become great citizens who want to be the best American that they can be, even though they most of the time don't have the same rights in regards to voting as the rest of us. Now, there's a common saying that criminals who go into prison do not come out better people, they come out better criminals, given the environment that they're subject to within prison. My policy change suggests that we completely stop building prisons, reallocate funds towards rehabilitation, as well as eliminate all mandatory minimums for nonviolent misdemeanors that are a first offense. I believe this will be a true catalyst for change. And now you might be asking, what can you do? This is really kind of in the hands of the legislature. So what can you can write to your congressman and demand prison reform. You can support initiatives such as the Sentencing Project and Prison Policy, which I mentioned earlier, which lobby for prison reform in Washington. Or if you want to take a more hands-on approach, go to one of the prisons that I mentioned and develop a connection to teach a prisoner. Numerous university studies have showed that there's a significant connection between literacy rate and crime rate. And it might seem daunting, but a little help could really go a long way in that. Now, our current system has deemed us the world's most locked up nation. And now, I personally do not believe this is what the Founding Fathers envisioned when they deemed America a land of the free.